The hose slipped from Sloane's grip, spraying a wild arc across the porch as Jason dangled the ring between two fingers. "You forgot something," he drawled. Malik didn't move, but the weight of his silence pressed at her back. Sloane's pulse hammered. Was this the moment she finally chose who she was going to be? Sloane Hartley sat on the chipped concrete steps of her porch, elbows on her knees, coffee cooling in her hands, staring at what used to be a garden and now looked like the wild had declared independence. 3 months of silence had seized everything. Roses bowed their heads like they'd given up. The vegetable beds wore a beard of weeds, and her grandmother's hydrangeas were a bleached confession of thirst. She'd planted all of it in a different life, when she still believed promises could be potting soil. "Those tomatoes are crying," a voice said from the sidewalk. Deep, calm, warm like late afternoon. She looked up. A tall black man in dark work pants and a washed thin t-shirt stood at her gate with a coil of scarred hands and a patient face that made her want to breathe deeper. His truck across the street read Bennett and Bloom Landscaping. A girl, 9 maybe, stood beside him, hugging a plastic watering can shaped like a blue elephant. Sloane smoothed the hem of her oversized sleep shirt over her thighs and tugged her robe tighter. She was thick and curvy and felt all of it at once now that someone could see her, the full hourglass she usually owned with a laugh, but today carried like a weight. "They're not crying," she said. "They're just dramatic." The little girl giggled. "I'm Maya," she said, as if they were already friends. "This is my dad. He knows things about plants." "I'm Malik," he added, pushing the gate open with 2 fingers, like he understood gates and boundaries and the difference. "We're finishing next door. Mrs. Halpin told me you had a showpiece once." He nodded toward the roses. "Good bones." Sloane swallowed. "It used to be." Maya peered at the sagging beds with a solemn frown. "It can be again. I don't need help." The words came out reflex more than truth. Help had strings, timelines, debts. Help had Jason's teeth in it, always chewing at her choices. "Okay," Malik said, simple as a shrug. Then to Maya, "Hey, kiddo, think you can ask Mrs. Halpin if we can borrow her hose for 10? Maya darted away like a streak of sunshine. "You don't have to," Sloane told him, standing. It's not that I don't see it. I just can't look at it and not feel everything." He set his toolbox down and leaned against the post like porch resting was a language he spoke. "When do you last water?" She tried to make her mind produce a date and found only empty drawers. "I don't remember." "That's a start," he said. "If you don't mind, I'll show you a trick. Deep soak for the tomatoes, mist for the hydrangeas. We can ignore everything that needs decisions. Water's the one thing that's always yes." "I didn't say yes." "You didn't say no." His smile was quiet, not cocky, not pitying, just sure. Maya returned, dragging a green hose twice her size, triumphant. "Permission granted," she announced. "Mrs. H says save those hydrangeas or I'll come over there myself." She winked like a tiny conspirator. Malik threaded the hose through the gate, walked the line to the spigot, and tested the pressure with his thumb. He waited long enough for the water to cool, then let it fall in a slow ring at the base of the tomatoes. "Roots," he said to Maya. "We feed the part no one sees." "Like compliments," Maya offered. "They're better when you mean them." Sloane's mouth twitched. "You two rehearsed that?" "Nah," Malik said. "She's just a menace." They moved from bed to bed. He showed Maya how to lay the spray like rain, not like a scolding. He crouched to tighten a loose coupling on the hose. He found the broken trellis leaned against the fences and righted it with 3 practiced motions. Every small fix felt like a hand on Sloane's back, steady without pushing. "You can just tell me to stop," he said once, glancing up at her, water arcing in a glitter of sun. "If I tell you to stop, do you stop?" "Of course." She watched his forearms flex under that thin shirt, watched the way his hands, scarred and careful, belonged to both strength and gentleness. "Don't stop yet." Maya took her hand without asking and tugged her toward the hydrangeas. "If you missed them in the morning, it's like coffee for flowers. If you missed them in the afternoon, it's like hot tea. Daddy says morning is better." "Your dad has opinions," Sloane said, letting herself be led, "about plants and people." Maya wrinkled her nose. "And pancakes." They watered in a rhythm that began to feel like breath. Malik didn't fill the air with advice. He offered sentences like stones in a path. "This one needs more shade. You don't have to save everything. Choose 3. We can prune what hurts later. You keep saying we, Sloane said. Habit, he answered. I crew by default. You don't know me. He turned the nozzle to a fine rain and lifted it over the drooping heads of the hydrangeas, letting the mist fall like forgiveness. I don't have to know you to see something worth saving. The tenderness of it landed in her like a soft weight. She had been left with the echo of slamming doors, the cheap shock of lights turned off for non-payment, the hollow clatter of promises becoming trash. Her garden had been her refusal, a tapestry of colour and taste and scent she could coax from soil. When Jason left, she had stopped touching anything that could respond to care, to risk being disappointed by life answering back. My ex loved perfection, she said suddenly, surprising herself. He liked restaurants with a 3-month wait and couches that looked like you never sat on them. He called this, she gestured at the ragged beds, a hobby. Said real things happen in boardrooms. Malik nodded like he'd met that man before in another shape. Real things happen where hands get dirty. Water hissed. Somewhere a bee shouldered into a blossom and came out golden. Maya crouched near the tomatoes, eyes narrowed at a leaf. Aphids, she announced. But just a few. We can bring ladybugs tomorrow. Tomorrow? Sloane echoed. If Miss Sloane is okay with a tiny army of polite bugs, Malik said, patient again. She wanted to say no. She wanted to close the gate and the day and the trembling inside her chest. Instead, she surprised herself again. Tomorrow's fine. They spent exactly 1 hour, the kind of hour that stretches and concentrates at once. By the end of it, the soil drank deeper. The roses looked almost brave. The hydrangeas loosened their death-tight shoulders. Malik shut off the water and draped the hose in a neat loop, as if order was a mercy he believed in. He wiped his hands on a rag and set it like a period on the porch rail. He didn't ask for money. He didn't pitch services. He pulled a card from his pocket, edges softened by the same hands that turned stubborn valves and lifted sagging stems, and handed it to her. Mornings are best, he said, before heat burns off kindness. You talk like a poet, she blurted. Occupational hazard. Plants make you honest. Maya reached into a backpack and produced 2 granola bars, thrusting one at Sloane. Emergency snacks, she explained. Dad forgets to eat when he takes care of things. I don't forget, Malik said. I reprioritize. Sloane looked at his card. White, simple, no logo, just a name and a number, and then at the neat coil of the hose, the upright trellis, the way her yard already felt less like a failure and more like a pause. Something unfamiliar unfolded inside her, small and fierce. You didn't have to do any of this, she said, voice rough. He glanced at Maya, who was teaching an ant the concept of a leaf boat. My kid is watching me. I want her to learn that when something is thirsty, you stop what you're doing and water it. People. Plants. Yourself. Sloane laughed, a quick bursting thing that felt like air finally getting where it needed to go. The laugh turned into a sound that might have been a sob if she let it, so she didn't. Instead, she looked at the trellis he'd straightened, at the careful loop of hose, at the way he'd set her broken clay pots into a tidy stack so they didn't look like shame anymore, just materials waiting for use. You're acting like my husband, she said, and it came out half question, half dare. Everything paused for a heartbeat, the chirp, the drip, even Maya's monologue to the ant. Malik's eyes met hers. Not startled, not offended, just steady. I'm acting like a neighbour who knows how to fix a hose, he said softly. Then, after a beat that stretched between them like a bridge, but I do believe in showing up like family, even when you're not sure you are yet. Maya hopped up, oblivious to the current crackling in the warm morning air. So tomorrow, ladybugs? Tomorrow, Sloane said, surprising herself a 3rd time. Bring an army. By 7, the next morning, Sloane had already swept the porch, put on real clothes, and made a pot of coffee strong enough to lift a tractor. It felt ridiculous to be nervous about a hose and a stranger and a girl with an elephant watering can, but there she was, checking her reflection in the front door glass and flattening an uncooperative curl. She told herself it was about dignity, about meeting the day halfway. Malik's truck eased to the curb like it belonged there. Maya popped out first, triumphant, holding a mesh bag that wriggled with specks of red. Ladybugs, she announced. 1 billion. She lowered her voice. Technically, it's 150. Malik followed with a tote and that steady, unhurried way of moving that made Sloane's shoulders drop a half-inch. A different shirt today, faded navy, dust on the knees of his work pants. He lifted a thermos. "I brought backup," he said. "I don't trust civilians to make coffee." "Rude," Sloane said, then grinned when he laughed. "Mine will fight you." They lined paper cups on the porch rail, steam threading the cool morning. Malik set the tote down and pulled out twine, stakes, a battered soil knife. He looked at the roses like a doctor greeting stubborn patients. "We'll release the ladybugs at the base," he told Maya. "Twilight's best, but hunger wins in the morning if you give them a job." "Do I need to say a speech?" Sloane asked. "Only if you feel ceremonial." He crouched, opening the mesh, and Maya cupped her hands as if she were catching stars. The beetles poured like living punctuation. Sloane knelt too, close enough to smell sun-warmed cotton and damp soil. Tiny red backs flickered against green. The world shrank to the small, fixable thing in front of her. "Okay," Malik said softly. "Now we give them privacy to eat their enemies." Sloane smiled at the bed, at the idea that even a garden got allies. "I have enemies?" she asked the tomatoes. "That tracks." They worked without hurry. Malik showed her how to sink her fingers to the second knuckle to check moisture, how to lay mulch like a promise. He tied a loose climber with 2 gentle loops. First loop holds, second loop forgives, and Sloane repeated it until it felt like she might remember later when no one was watching. Every time she turned, he had righted something: a leaning paver, the squeak at the screen door hinge, the wobble in the porch rail. Husband moves, she thought, startled by the warmth that came with the words, not the performance of a man who wanted credit, the quiet, automatic tending of someone who assumed the work was his. She caught him looking at the chipped saucer under the hydrangea pot. "I meant to replace that," she said. He shrugged. "It's doing its job. Pretty can come later." Jason would have said throw it out. He would have said nothing belonged on a porch that wasn't catalogue ready. She pressed her palm to the peeling paint of the post and felt the porch steady itself under her. "Here," Malik said, offering her the nozzle. "You do the hydrangeas. Slow, like rain that changed its mind. Is that a technical term?" "It's all technical." His voice lightened. "You're doing fine." The water rattled, warmed, cooled. When mist turned to a soft veil, she moved it back and forth, watching the leaves catch droplets like secrets. Maya drifted to the side bed, narrating to the ants about property rights. The morning settled into the 3 of them: water, small jokes, the clink of stakes. "Why Bennett and Bloom?" Sloane asked at last, nodding toward the truck. "You and." "My grandparents," he said. "They taught me plants. The bloom is for what we're aiming at, not what we start with." He glanced at her. "And the cards are ugly, I know." "They're plain," she said carefully. "They're tragic," Maya corrected. "Dad's allergic to fonts." "I could help," Sloane heard herself say. "I'm a designer, or I was. Still am, I guess." She felt heat on her neck. "I haven't taken on new clients since." She flicked her eyes toward the wreckage of weeds and let the sentence die. "Since the drought," Malik said, as if that were the only context that mattered. She nodded. "Since the drought." He tied another loop, watched her mist, and didn't push. Relief unknotted something small and sore in her chest. He wasn't collecting information to use later. He was simply making space for breath. When the sun rose high enough to silver the fence, they took a coffee break on the steps. Maya sprawled at their feet, counting ladybugs and declaring them employees. Sloane tucked her legs to the side, aware of her own body in a way that felt new, less like a thing to be judged and more like a thing that was carrying her. Malik poured refills. His hands, nicked and rough, were careful around heat. "Do you always do this?" she asked. "Show up, fix things." He considered. "I try to decide the kind of man I want Maya to know exists," he said. "Then I try to be that, on purpose. It keeps me honest." "What kind of man is that?" "The one who shows up when it isn't glamorous, who waters before the day gets hot." He tapped the rail. "Who understands that neglect and cruelty are cousins, and we don't invite either to dinner." Sloane let out a breath that sounded like a laugh and a prayer. "I lived with a man who loved glossy surfaces," she said. "If it looked right, then it was right, and if it didn't, then it was my fault. The garden made him itchy. Dirt made him mad." She made a face. Imperfection made him mean. Malik's jaw flexed. Not performative anger, just a quiet tightening, a witness. Control isn't care, he said. That control is a fence you can't see until you run into it. The truth of it hit hard enough that she had to look away. The hydrangeas shone faintly, flecked with mist and morning. Her phone buzzed. Her stomach dropped before she saw the name. Jason. She let it go to voicemail, turned the phone face down on the step, and didn't apologize for the way her hands shook. Malik didn't ask. He pointed at the far bed. We're going to lose those marigolds if we don't move them, he said. They're begging for more sun. She breathed until her hands remembered themselves. Then we'll move them. We? She rolled her eyes. Don't get greedy. They dug and lifted, a slow choreography, soil under nails, sweat at temples, the small gasp of roots letting go. When she wobbled with the weight of a clump, his hands slid under the base, steadying, not taking. They set the plant into new ground together. He pressed soil around it with his palm, firm, then gentled the top layer with his fingers. There, he murmured. You're home. He said it to the marigold, but the words found other targets. They ate granola bars and apple slices as if it were a feast. Maya constructed a ladybug hotel out of a leaf and 2 pebbles, announced she'd be charging rent, then asked 100 questions about pollinators that Malik answered with patient delight. Sloane listened. The 3 of them sounded like a tiny orchestra learning a song by ear. Across the street, someone slammed a car door. A head turned, the long look of a neighbor who planned to report back to the neighborhood text thread. Sloane braced for the flicker of shame she'd trained into her spine. It didn't come. Her porch was her porch. The man on it was watering what she loved. The girl at his feet was laughter in a body. Let them report. When the hour folded toward its end, Malik rinsed the tools and stacked them. Neat. He wound the hose in a circle that looked like intention and set the nozzle to off with a small, satisfying click. He wiped the rail where dirt had smudged it. These were the gestures that undid her, the tiny dignities that said this place deserved care. You're acting like my husband again, Sloane said, and it was almost light this time. Again? He looked amused. Twice constitutes a pattern. He nodded solemnly. Union rules state I also get a lunch break and 1 dad joke per visit. That was the dad joke, Maya groaned. He has worse ones. He dug in the tote, pulled out a laminated card with a grid on it. Watering schedule, he said, handing it over. Front beds, back corner, potted things, the blessed, the cursed. He pointed at a line of checkboxes. If you want us to keep a morning slot this week, text me a photo of this card with today checked. Accountability is not romance, but it helps things grow. She stared at the neat boxes, the tiny printed notes in the margins. He had made a system for her chaos, and it didn't feel like a cage. It felt like a hand held out. Okay, she said. Today's checked. Maya bounced. Tomorrow, can we build a fairy house? The ladybugs need neighbours. Sloane looked at the cleaned beds, the small army now invisible among leaves, the rows that had the audacity to unfurl a millimetre as if to say, see. Tomorrow, she said, and the word didn't scare her. After they left, she walked the garden alone. The air smelled faintly of wet earth and coffee. The trellis stood straighter than yesterday. The hose slept in a disciplined circle, and on the porch rail under her mug, she found a small nursery pot she hadn't noticed. Lavender, sturdy and fragrant, with a handwritten tag tucked into the soil. For the steps. Sun, patience, and a little forgiveness. She carried it to the front, set it where the morning would find it, and took a picture. The angle caught the lavender, the revived roses behind it, and the corner of the porch where the hose made its quiet halo. She texted the photo to the number on the tragic card. Today is checked. The reply came almost before she lowered the phone. Looks like rain that changed its mind. See you at 7. At 6:58 the next morning, the sky was the colour of a clean slate, and the air held that thin cool that only lasts until the sun remembers itself. Sloane had moved the lavender to the front step, swept the path again, and put on a green wrap dress that made her waist look deliberate instead of accidental. She told herself she dressed for the heat. She knew better. Malik's knock was the soft rap of someone who doesn't assume. Maya peered around his hip, already grinning. We brought reinforcements, she said, lifting a paper bag like a magician about to produce a dove. Inside, twine, wooden craft sticks, a jam jar of pebbles, a spool of silver thread. Fairy house supplies. Also donuts. Donuts are critical infrastructure, Malik said, carrying a coil of drip line over one shoulder. He looked at the lavender in its new spot and nodded once, as if she'd passed a quiz she didn't know she was taking. That's the place. They started with the fairy house because Maya had the energy of a committee and the focus of a scientist. Sloane crouched with her, thick thighs pressing against her calves, the dress tugging at her curves. She didn't pull it down. She wedged a little stick into a notch in a rock and tied it with the silver thread like she'd been tying small impossible things for years. By the time the door was fixed and the pebble path laid, Sloane's hands were dusty and her hairline damp. It felt like being 10 and making something that only you could see properly. Maya whispered to the leaf bed like it might report her to a union. Lease terms. Be kind. Don't step on the tenants. No late-night parties. Ladybugs need their rest. Tell that to the aphids, Malik murmured, kneeling to run the drip line. He taught Sloane how to snake the tubing through the beds, where to punch emitters so each root zone got fed. We're buying you time, he said, so you don't have to choose between deadlines and watering. He glanced up. You design? Designed, she said, corporate things mostly. Annual reports that tried to make bad news look brave, she swallowed. I was good at it. Then life got loud. My eyes couldn't see past the noise. You want a job with clearer stakes. He held out the punch and let her press it through the line. The pop was a small, satisfying sound. Plants are honest. They tell you if you messed up, or if you did okay. I need that, she said, and surprised herself with how quickly it came out. He didn't offer a speech. He watched her measure, let her choose where to put the next emitter, and said yes when she glanced at him. It was like being trusted into competence. They ate donuts on the steps, sugar on fingers, coffee cooling slow. Maya presented a paper schedule she'd drawn with boxes and doodles, the official seal of a 9-year-old board. We also have a Saturday proposal, she said, straight-faced. Park, then our house for dinner, then Grandpa stories. He tells good ones. Sometimes they are true. Saturday, Sloane repeated, startled by the way the word lit her ribs. If you're free, Malik added. The if was gentle. He wanted her to be able to say no and keep the mornings they'd already made. I'm free, she said, and it felt like telling the truth about more than a day. Saturday at the park, Maya bought Sloane a paper cone of roasted nuts with the solemnity of a treaty offering. The vendors were already calling Maya by name. She introduced Sloane to the woman who sold seedlings with the flourish of a matred. This is my friend Sloane. She's rebuilding a garden and her feelings, but mostly the garden. The seedling woman, grey hair in a messy bun, didn't blink. Geraniums for the sill, she said, and tucked a cutting into Sloane's hands like a blessing. Malik walked a half-step behind them with a paper bag of herbs and a look that made Sloane's neck feel warm. He didn't touch her. Crowded park, Maya between them, but she could feel where his presence ended and the rest of the world began. At his house later, the backyard opened like a quiet exhale. Raised beds, tidy paths, a small trellis with beans writing their grammar up the strings. A flat of marigolds waited on the table like a choir. Maya's fairy town occupied a shady corner, shell roofs, twig bridges, a bottle-cap marketplace. The grill smoked low. Somewhere inside, a radio played a song that sounded like sunlight on an old table. Shoes off if you want the good grass feel, Malik said, barefoot already. His feet looked like someone who worked and risked splinters and healed anyway. Sloane slipped out of her sandals and laughed when cool blades pressed between her toes. I forgot this, she said. Feet honest. Maya grabbed her hand. Grandpa! She shouted. She's here! Cal Bennett stepped onto the porch, wiping his hands, tall and spare with a beard gone soft grey and eyes that saw the inside of things. So this is our mystery, he said, and his smile arrived before his handshake. Welcome. I'm the source of all my son's better habits and none of his bad puns. Lies, Malik said and kissed his father's cheek. Sloane handed him the small bouquet she'd bought at the market, stems of basil and zinnias wrapped in newspaper. Cal lifted it to his face and breathed like someone who didn't rush pleasure. You brought perfume and supper, he said. Smart woman. The kitchen was simple and used. Cast-iron pans, a crooked stack of plates, a calendar on the fridge with Maya's crooked hearts on random squares. Sloane leaned on the counter while Malik salted chicken thighs like he'd learned how to season a thing to taste like itself. Cal told a story about Malik at 7, trying to plant a soccer ball to grow a team. Maya rolled her eyes with theatrical despair. He still believes compost can fix character. Sometimes it can, Cal said. Then, to Sloane, quieter, "How's your heart this month?" No one had asked her that directly in years. She set down the spoon she'd been pretending to need. "Hungry," she said, "and scared, and hopeful, which feels like treason." Cal's nod was not pity. "Hope is not naive," he said. "Hope is a discipline, same as watering. You don't do it because you feel like it. You do it because you want something to grow." Malik didn't look up from the pan, but the corner of his mouth moved like he'd filed the line next to 100 others. Sloane watched him move in his kitchen with ordinary grace, opening a drawer with his hip, rinsing a cutting board, flipping chicken with a flick that was more confidence than show. It hit her again, out of nowhere, that this was what safety felt like in a body. Not fireworks, steadiness. After dinner, Maya dragged Sloane to the fairy town to add a library, tiny books made of leaf pages and ant handwriting, while the men picked up. The backyard smelled like thyme and rain that had forgotten to fall. When the fireflies came, small and early, Sloane told herself not to read omens into insects. She failed a little. On the porch later, dishes done, Maya curled in Cal's lap while he told her a story about a woman who thought her garden was finished with her but discovered it had just been waiting. "Everything has a dormant season," he said, tapping her nose. "Rest isn't death. It's rest." Maya pretended to be offended. "I know that," she said, and yawned. Cal carried her in. The house got quiet in a way that wasn't uncomfortable. Malik stood at the sink, rinsing the knife and setting it to dry, the last sound of work clicking back into place. Sloane felt the shift in the air and then named it. They were alone for the first time without a little narrator between them. "You all right?" he asked, voice lower now that there was no one to model calm for. "I am." She heard the surprise in her own answer. He leaned his hip against the counter. "I wasn't sure you'd come. I wasn't either," she admitted, "and then I pictured you and Maya eating this good food and telling stories, and I was angry at the idea of missing it." She paused. "I'm not angry much these days, mostly just awake." He smiled. It wasn't the big friendly one he used for neighbours and Maya's teachers. It was smaller, private. Awake is good. She watched his hands still damp on the dish towel, his forearms, the old nicks whitening when he flexed, the mouth that made everything feel less dramatic than she feared. "You keep doing it," she said, a little helpless, acting like the person who fixes the hinge and salts the chicken and knows which plant goes where. "The husband thing," he said, and his smile tilted. "You keep thinking it's a spell." "I keep thinking it's dangerous," she said. "That my body can't tell the difference between competence and devotion, that I'll mistake kindness for permanence." "That's not on you," he said. "That's on the men who taught you wrong." She closed her eyes, opened them. "He didn't like dirt," she said. "He didn't like the way my body looked when I was bending over to pull weeds. He wanted me small, quiet, clean, like an empty vise he could put things in." Malik took that in without flinching. "I like you loud," he said. "And I like how you take up space on your own porch." The answer landed in her with the solidity of a built step. She stepped onto it. "You're acting like my husband," she said again, soft, not quite a joke this time. He set the towel down. The kitchen hummed, the fridge, the cricket outside, the whole house breathing slow. "I'm acting like myself," he said. "If that lines up with something you want, I'm not mad at it." She could have kissed him then. She wanted to. She knew where to stand, how to tilt her face, the way his hands would bracket her jaw like he was catching water. Instead, she reached for the stack of index cards she'd tucked into her bag and slid them onto the counter. "Mock-ups," she said, relief and fear scraping each other. "For Bennett and Bloom. Colours from the herbs, a serif that looks like it remembers books, a mark that's a root and a leaf in one line." He flipped through slowly, careful with the corners like they might bruise. When he looked back up, that smaller smile came again, the one that felt like a matched key. "You made us look like what we tried to do," he said. "That's not just pretty, that's honest." Her throat went tight. "I needed to make something that wasn't pretending." "Keep going," he said, accepting the cards as if they were the first tomatoes of the season. "We'll print them when you say they're ready, and next week, if you're free, We're installing a patio for a woman who keeps apologizing for her house. She needs you to tell her what you told me just now. That it's not about pretty first. That it's about truth first, he said, and reached for her hand like it was a tool he trusted. He didn't pull. He just held it, warm and sure, the way you hold a thing you plan to use for good. Monday came in clean and bright, the kind of morning that makes even duct tape look optimistic. Sloane had been up late, finessing the Bennett and Bloom logo, root and leaf in one unbroken line, then up early, printing mock-ups on good stock. She fed the sheets through her old inkjet like a prayer and taped one to a scrap of cardboard. When Malik's knock came, she was already on the porch, coffee in one hand, the sign in the other. He whistled low. You gave us Bones and Bloom. Bread and butter, too, if you let me build a website, she said, then flushed at how eager it sounded. Sold, he said without bargaining. Come test your voice on a client who's allergic to her own house. They took his truck. Maya sat in the back with a shoebox of shells and glass marbles. Fairy Town Annex, she explained, swinging her feet to a song only she knew. Sloane watched the city slide by and realized she wasn't rehearsing apologies the way she used to in cars with other people. Malik drove like a man who understood arrival wasn't the only point. Mrs. Kasim met them on a small stoop, palms fluttering, apologies spilling out in 2 languages. It's a mess. Don't look. The patio was supposed to be here, but the last guy said my yard is confused. I am confused. My husband passed, and the boys, they're busy. I'm sorry. Come in. Don't come in. I didn't sweep. Sloane put her hand over the woman's on the second sorry. You don't owe us perfection, she said. You owe yourself a place to sit down. Something unclenched in the woman's face. She led them through the narrow house, family photos, a couch with a worn spot, and into a backyard that had decided to be 3 different rooms at once. A patch of dirt, a square of uneven brick, a lemon tree trying its heart out in a plastic pot. Okay, Malik said, kneeling as if dirt were a conversation partner. We can work with this. He measured. Sloane paced, sketchbook open. The rectangles everyone defaulted to felt wrong here, like a bad haircut. She drew a curve that swept from the back door toward the fence, a seating nook tucked into its belly. No right angles, she said. You deserve a space that hugs you. Mrs. Kasim put a hand to her chest, surprised. Yes, she said, and then again softer. Yes. Malik glanced at the sketch and nodded. Gravel base, soldier course of pavers to hold the curve, decomposed granite top. We can do it in 2 mornings. And plants, Sloane added, pointing. Lavender to soften the edge. A real pot for your lemon tree. Maybe thyme between the stones to perfume the air when you walk. The woman's eyes shone. My husband loved thyme, she said. He always smelled like it when he cooked. Then we'll put it where your feet can wake the memory. Malik said, already loading supplies from the truck. They fell into motion. Malik stringing lines, tamping base, checking slope with a bubble level. Sloane chalking the curve, hands confident from years of vector paths. Maya crawling the fence line, hunting for treasure, turning bottle caps and a marble into a patio warming gift. Sloane's body burned in the good way that comes from purpose. She hauled pavers with Malik, his hand always there a beat before she needed it, under the heavy end, steadying the corner, never taking the load away, only evening it. When Sloane's phone buzzed, she didn't look. It buzzed again. Not a client. The vibration had a certain hunger to it. She stepped aside, swallowed once and checked. Saw you at the park yesterday. You look different. We should talk. She put the phone in her back pocket and walked back to the curve like it was a line she could choose to stay inside. Malik watched her not read the second text and said nothing. The kindness she'd started to recognize as a practice, not an accident. By noon, the soldier course was in, the arc holding its own shape. Mrs. Kasim brought sweet tea and plates she kept apologizing were mismatched. They're perfect, Sloane said, and meant it. The woman sat with them on the step. When my husband was alive, he would start making dinner at 4 o'clock, she said. He liked the slow. After he was gone, 4 o'clock was like a ghost. She looked at the curve and smiled without showing teeth. This will help. On the drive back, dust in their hair, Maya asleep against the window, Malik rested his wrist on the top of the wheel and glanced at Sloane's thigh where her dress had ridden up. He didn't look away quickly like the glance was a crime. He didn't stare like she owed him something. He looked like a man acknowledging sunlight. "You were good with her," he said. "It felt like design with better stakes," Sloane said. "I like telling the truth and it making something you can sit on. If you want more mornings like that," he said, "I can give you addresses." "I want," she said, and the want didn't scare her this time. Back at Sloane's, they checked the garden. Ladybugs had unionized in secret. The aphids were applying for new housing elsewhere. The lavender on the step had caught itself and steadied. Sloane's porch had started to look like a person lived there on purpose. "I brought you a timer," Malik said, holding up a small box. "It's not romance, but it's devotion." "Devotion is romance," she said, tilting her head toward the spigot. "Install your metaphors." He knelt and threaded the timer on, hands sure. "I get cautious around this part," he said without looking up. "The feelings that look like a thing I used to hold." He tightened a gasket. "Maya's mom left for another city. I thought loving steady would be enough to convince someone to stay. Turns out love doesn't barter like that." Sloane sank to sit on the step next to him. "He left too," she said, "and I kept trying to be shinier, cleaner, smaller. I don't think I believed I could be loved for the way I take up space." He clicked the timer into place and sat back on his heels. "I like the way you take up space," he said. "I like that you wear the porch like you own it." He was still on the ground. She was on the step. They were almost eye level. The air between them felt newly oxygenated, like the first seconds after a summer storm. She reached out and touched the damp curl by his temple, a gesture so small it felt like a yes you whisper in a church. He didn't flinch. He leaned into it, the way plants lean when you finally give them the thing they needed. "May I?" he began. "Yes," she said, before she could think of all the reasons to be clever. The kiss was not cinematic. It was better. It was a meeting at the point where two steady things touch and remember they can be warm. He kissed her like she was real and awake and not a secret he needed to hide from his child. She kissed him like she could afford to close her eyes. They parted when the screen door next door creaked, neighbor gossip rustling like a curtain. They laughed, foreheads leaning together for one more heartbeat, lovers' language already beginning in the space between breaths. Sloane's phone buzzed again. This time it was a picture. Jason's hand holding a ring she'd left in a dish. "Yours?" The message after, "I'm outside." She stood too fast. Malik had already noted the angle of her shoulders. "You want me here?" he asked. Not a challenge. "An offer." "Yes," she said, and then, more firmly, "yes." Jason leaned on the hood of a car that cost more than time. He looked like an advertisement that forgot to be kind. His eyes did a slow inventory of Sloane's body, the porch, the coil of hose. They snagged on Malik like a sleeve catches a nail. "New hobby?" Jason asked. "Collecting volunteers?" Sloane felt Malik step up beside her, but not in front of her. "You're on my property," she said, surprised at her own voice. It was lower than she remembered, steadier. "Say what you need to say and go." Jason held up the ring like an exhibit. "You forgot this." "I didn't forget," she said. "I left it." He scoffed. "Since when do you leave nice things?" "Since I started preferring true ones," she said. "You don't get to text me at work sites and show up on my street." He looked past her to Malik. "And you don't get to." He waved a hand, sloppy with entitlement. "Play house. She's done being defined by you," Sloane said before Malik could say anything he'd regret. "We're not having a scene on my steps." She pointed at the sidewalk. "Off." Jason's mouth worked around a word that belonged in a different century. He settled for, "You'll regret this." "I regret the years I watered a dead thing," she said. "This? I won't." Malik didn't posture. He didn't add volume. He stood so Sloane could feel the heat where his arm almost touched hers and let her talk to the man who used to own her fear. Jason put the ring on the porch rail like he was doing her a favor and stalked to his car. He looked back once, expecting someone to stop him. No one did. The engine's snarl shoved itself down the block and turned. The quiet after was not empty. It was like the moment after you cut a cord and a bell stops hurting the air. Maya, who had been watching from behind the curtain with the solemnity of a judge, cracked the door. "Is it safe to redecorate the fairy annex?" she asked. "It's safe," Sloane said, and the word walked through her body, first to last room. Malik reached for the ring and didn't touch it. He looked at Sloane's face. "You okay?" "I think so," she said, feeling the shake arrive only when safety did. My hands are loud. He covered them with his palms, warm, rough, familiar now. Hope is a discipline, he said, echoing his father without making it a sermon, and so is leaving. Sloane breathed, watched the lavender nod like it had opinions. She picked up the ring, not reverent, just tidy, and dropped it into the empty clay pot where she kept broken shards for drainage. Useful now, she said, surprised at her own grin. Finally. Maya whooped quietly. Can we celebrate with ice cream? Because that felt like a very brave thing. We can, Malik said. Sloane looked at the curve of her path, the neat loop of hose, the timer clicking soft as a heartbeat. She tipped her chin toward the kitchen. I have cherries, she said. We could make sundaes. It's not fancy. Malik smiled, the small private smile. It's true, he said. That's better. They pitted cherries at the sink and stained their fingers a stubborn red that wouldn't let go. Maya pretended the pits were meteorites and launched them into the compost with dramatic sound effects. Malik scooped vanilla into bowls. Sloane warmed a jar of chocolate sauce under the tap, and nobody said the word X again. They ate on the steps with spoons that clinked against ceramic, and when Maya declared the sundaes therapeutic, Sloane laughed hard enough to feel it loosen places that had been tight for years. After dishes, they walked the beds. The lavender hummed. A rose had the audacity to offer an honest-to-God bloom, half open, reckless. Sloane touched the petal with the back of her finger like a secret handshake. I almost forgot I could do this, she said. Care without bargaining. Malik looked like he wanted to write that sentence down. Keep it, he said, for when the mornings are loud. They stayed until the porch light came on by itself. When Malik and Maya finally climbed into the truck, Maya stuck her head out the window and stage whispered, We will require sundaes after every brave thing, then blew a kiss and disappeared into the evening. The week unfurled with the ordinary holiness of tasks. They finished Mrs. Kasim's patio at dawn on Wednesday. She stood on the curve like it was a boat pulling away from grief and pressed thyme between the stones with her heel until the smell found her eyes. 4 o'clock will be softer now, she said. Malik set the bubble level on the table like a medal. Sloane snapped a photo for the new website. A hand, a curve, a herb crushed into memory. On Thursday, Cal stopped by Sloane's porch with a tin of screws and an old story about turning a cracked ring into a wind chime ornament because metal doesn't know it's heartbroken. He fixed the porch light that had been moody for a year, then leaned on the rail and watched the timer click. Looks like devotion, he said. Ugly little machine telling the truth at the same time every day. Ugly truth I can handle, Sloane said. It's the beautiful truth that scares me. Only at first. He winked. Then you start scheduling it. Friday brought an email from a neighborhood association asking if Bennett and Bloom could bid a pocket park rehab. Malik forwarded it with one line, Want to design a corner the city forgot. She typed back before she could swallow the joy. Yes, I want to make a place that forgives people on their way home. Saturday morning returned them to the farmer's market, where the seedling woman tucked a tray of violas into Sloane's hands. For the boarders, little faces that encourage you when you pass. Malik bought a copper watering can he didn't need and watched Sloane argue, kindly but effectively, for a discount on bulk mulch. When they loaded the truck, he kissed her temple. Not a performance, just a thank you his mouth gave her skin. At home, they set the violas by the steps to harden off. Sloane picked up the small clay pot where she'd dropped Jason's ring, now sitting among terracotta shards, useful in the dark. She carried it to the work table, looked at the dull circle a long time, then called Maya. Help, she said. We're making a mosaic. Maya came running in a smear of popsicle and purpose. Together they pressed the ring flat under a hammer, not to destroy it, but to change its job. They fitted the softened metal and blue glass marbles into a stepping stone mould, poured concrete over the pattern and tapped the sides to settle bubbles. When they lifted the mould an hour later, the circle had become 2 crescent shapes surrounded by bits of sky. Old orbit, new moon, Maya declared. Better tides. They set it by the hose. Every time Sloane turned the spigot, she would stand on the thing that used to mark a promise kept under the wrong rules. That evening, dinner at Cal's felt like a ceremony disguised as spaghetti. Maya presented the stepping stone with both hands. Cal cleared a spot near his hose for it like it mattered. which, of course, it did. After plates, in that golden pocket of time when coffee smells like patience, Cal pulled a small wooden box from a drawer and set it in front of Sloane. "From my toolbox, not my jewelry box," he said. "I figure your kind of shine lives in cedar and sweat." Inside lay a thin band made from copper wire, hand-twisted, solder seam imperfect as a scar. "When my wife and I were broke," he said, "we wore these while we saved for the shiny ones. Turned out we liked them better. They remembered our hands." Sloane touched the copper. It was warm already, as if it had been waiting for human skin. "You sure?" she asked. "About the past?" Cal said. "No. About blessing the present? Very." She didn't put it on. Not yet. But she held it in her palm all the way home, fist closed around a future she was no longer afraid to picture. The night before the Pocket Park pitch, Sloane stayed up sketching benches that cradled spines and a walkway that bent around the old maples like respect. She wrote small sentences in the margins, shade for lunch breaks, space for grief under the elm. At 3 a.m. she went outside barefoot and watered the border violas, because devotion wasn't just in timers. It was in sleepless women touching petals in the dark. She woke to the sound of someone moving in her yard and didn't startle. Malik was installing something along the back bed, kneeling on a foam pad, headlamp making a small galaxy on his cap. "Caught," he said, grinning up at her. "What are you sneaking now?" "A koi pond." "A gazebo?" "Last zone," he said, patting the drip line into place. "I left it for late because I wanted to finish it with you, but we kept getting good kind of interrupted." He clicked a connector and stood. "Come here." He handed her the punch. She popped the last emitter through the tubing. The little sound was indecently satisfying. He set the timer to the new cycle, and together they watched water stitch through the bed, each plant receiving its tiny gift. Her eyes stung for reasons water doesn't fix. "Everything in?" she asked. "Almost," he said. He wiped his palms on his shirts and reached into his back pocket. "I had a plan, but then you built a better one by accident." He held up a stake tag, the kind you write plant names on, and it took her a second to understand. On the blank white space in his careful block letters he'd written, "Will you grow with us?" A length of twine looped through the hole. Her laugh came out half-sob. "This is your proposal?" she managed. "On a plant label?" "I figured you trust tags more than speeches," he said, smile unsure for the first time since she'd known him. "We can call it engagement, or we can call it making official what we've already practiced. Copper if you like, nothing if you don't. But I want what we're doing to have a name I can say in front of anybody. I want my daughter to know that choosing a person is a daily verb you keep conjugating." She looked at him, at the man who showed up with a hose, who tasted thyme like a memory, who stood next to her and let her do the talking when history knocked on her steps. She thought of the stepping stone by the spigot, the metal learning a new moon. She thought of Cal's copper ring and Maya's steady narrations and the patio curve that hugged grief into somewhere you could sit down. Sloane took the stake from his hand and tucked it into the soil of the lavender by the step. Then she held out her palm. "Copper, please," she said. "I like a ring that remembers work." He slid Cal's wire band onto her finger. It was scratchy and perfect. Maya appeared like a celebrant who'd been waiting behind the curtain for her cue, confetti composed of hole-punch dots from yesterday's project showering them both. "Finally," she declared, hugging their hips. I was running out of synonyms for almost. They didn't rush a wedding. They didn't post a picture with captions pretending a single day could hold the weight of 1,000 mornings. They told Cal and Mrs. Kasim and the seedling woman with the good cuttings. The neighborhood group chat found out because the neighbor across the street cried happy on her porch and texted everyone. Sloane printed the new Bennett and Bloom cards on thick stock that felt like a handshake and built a website where every photo looked like someone had been considered. At the Pocket Park pitch, Sloane did the talking while Malik held the drawings like a frame, and the committee chair, a retired nurse with forearms that could still lift a person, said, "You two are building a place where small mercies can sit down." They won the bid. On the walk back to the truck, Malik squeezed Sloane's hand once, quick and fierce. "That's what I want our life to feel like," he said. "Small mercies with a place to sit." They celebrated with sundaes, because doctrine demanded it. Maya added sliced peaches and declared it seasonal. Cal showed up with a mason jar of sweet tea and 2 lawn chairs he said were marital counselling if you used them properly, side by side, facing the same thing. At dawn the next morning, the timer clicked and the beds began to drink. Sloane and Malik stood barefoot on the stepping stone by the spigot, old orbit, new moon, and watched water find routes they had chosen together. The sky went from slate to the kind of blue that forgives your worst imaginations of the day. "You're acting like my husband," Sloane said, because it was an old joke that had turned true. "I'm acting like your husband," he said, "and also like your crew, and like a man who intends to water this with you until we're both very old and very funny." Maya burst out with a plastic crown tilted on her head and a pack of seed packets clutched to her chest. "Ceremonial planting of the engagement garden," she announced. "Instructions: hope first, then water." They knelt together and pressed seeds into soil that already knew their names. When they were done, Sloane sat back on her heels, copper bright on her finger, dirt in the crescents of her nails, a future scheduled not by fear but by practice. The sprinkler hissed and whispered across the beds, and the morning took their promise and soaked it in.